Evening, everyone. Please be seated. Welcome to another Peaceful Solution Character Education Teacher Certification course. Get all my notes spread out here. Get ready to bring all this information to you. All right. So welcome, everyone. We're going to be picking up or continuing where we left off last class, which was in chapter 7 here. Chapter 7 of the acceptance unit, and we are on page 136. And of course, we started covering last class this topic here of self-control, because what we're dealing with here, if we go back to the title of this chapter here on page 131, it's entitled My Choices and My Future. Okay, so we're showing the children, our students, how the choices that they make right now in life are going to trickle down to the consequences that they are left dealing with in the future. Now, whether those are positive or beneficial, or they're negative and harmful, it all depends on the choices that they make right now. So it's important that we stress for them to really stop and consider, and this is what we're covering when we get into the self-control. We're talking about the self-control portion of this decision-making, that they stop and consider the choices that they're making. Consider the outcome of the choices that they make, so that they're not impulsive, that they're not done without careful consideration. And of course, we're going to be covering a lot of these words as we move through this lesson here tonight. But I'd like to go back to Lesson Plan 7, page D here, and we're going to reread a portion of Procedure 4, because we read this. Well, we'll just read it again in case you're joining us for the first time. And if you're following along, just to refresh in our memories so we can understand the purpose or procedure that we need to make sure we're continuing in covering this evening. And number 4, procedure 4, says, explain that the need to fit in could result in feeling pressure to do things that they wouldn't usually do. However, exercising self-control in their interactions and choices is the first step in dealing with the influence of negative peer pressure. And of course, we're covering this topic of self-control this evening. Have students read and discuss the section entitled Self-Control on page 136, pages 136 through 138 in their handbooks, and emphasize that careful consideration is needed to avoid poor choices. Okay, so let's go back to page 136, and we're going to pick up where we left off last class. And just as a little pop quiz, does anybody remember what the little acronym that I kind of gave for you to help you remember if you had to choose between negative influences and doing what is morally correct? Remember what it was to help you kind of remember? Stay. That's right. Someone said it back there. Okay, stay. Stop, think, and ask. Okay, just stop. When you think about staying, you think about stopping. So like when your parent tells a child to stay right where you are. Stay still. Don't move. Right? You kind of do this mentally. Not that you have to physically stop, but you mentally stop, and you start to take an accounting of all the information that you might be being bombarded with at that time, because something's pulling at the student to make a decision. Oh, whether it's friends, come on, we got to do this. We got hurry up. We need an answer right now. Or come on, they're going to leave without us. Or whether it's something that they're wanting to do. Sneak out of the house and do something. They got to do it before somebody gets home, or if somebody wakes up, or they have to stop and think. Okay, and it's very, very important that we really emphasize that there is no decision that they have to make impulsively, especially when they take into consideration that decision could bring them harm that they need to make immediately at that time. Outside of immediately making the decision to not do something, but they don't have to, they should always be thinking about the outcome, right? If anything is ever considered or ever brought up in their consideration, that this could bring me harm, then that should really throw up a red flag in their mind, right? Because positive choices will never bring you harm, okay? Positive choices will never cause embarrassment or shame, okay? Positive choices won't take away from their building or the building of their positive character. All right, so this is where we're going to pick up where we left off last class on page 136. And if you look just above those bold words there, stop, think, and ask, at the beginning of that sentence, it says, if you are ever faced with having to choose between a negative influence and doing what is morally correct, stop, think, and ask yourself the following questions. And the first thing we have here is, what negative consequences could result from my action? And if you notice there, it's using a combination of two words there, negative consequences. Now, in the peaceful solution, we use rewards and consequences. Now that doesn't inherently make the word consequences bad, right? It just makes it easier to distinguish between something positive and, in this case, and how we're using it, something negative. If you look back to your glossary on page 163 here, in between the bookworm and the book scholar, I get, or the worm scholar, I'm not sure what that guy is here. You look at the word consequence on page 163, it says something that logically or naturally follows an action or consideration. Anything, right? You run a red light, you get a ticket, or you get hit by a car who has the green light, right? You pick up some money that you found on the ground and you hand it back to the owner. You're shown the consequences. You're an honest person. You might be thanked or rewarded or whatever. Okay, a consequence is not inherently something negative. Like I said, we're just using it to show or to differentiate between the rewards and the consequences, because otherwise we'd be saying the consequences and the consequences. So and it can get pretty confusing. But in number one here, we see what negative consequences, okay, what negative outcomes, what results, negative type of results could result from my actions if I go this route. If I feel that choosing a friend or a negative influence or following along with them, what will be the negative consequences, or what negative consequences could result from my actions, right? It could be anything. It depends on what the situation is. And we can, this is the opportunity that you can kind of pick the brains of your students and have them give you some examples of situations in which they could make a choice that could potentially bring about a negative consequence, right? Maybe trying a drug for the first time, or even alcohol, right? Getting in a vehicle with somebody who has been drinking and driving, or who is just intoxicated. They don't even have to be drunk. They can be intoxicated with any other numerous amounts of substances. In the United States, we have DWIs, driving while intoxicated, and driving under the influence, okay? And that can fall into several different categories. It could be alcohol, or it could be any other type of substance. It could be a controlled substance, or it could be an illegal substance, okay? But the fact is, you're operating in a motor vehicle with an altered frame of mind, without the ability to make decisions to follow the rules that govern your safe operation of that vehicle. So what do the police do? What do law enforcement do? They pull you and everybody else out of harm's way by getting you off the road. And sometimes people have to go sit in the detox box, for a little bit until they, get bailed out and wear off their drunkenness or their intoxication. But needless to say, it becomes a very dangerous situation when someone's operating a heavy vehicle, something that's several thousand pounds, at 50, 60, even 30 miles an hour, and they don't have the sense of reasoning to stop the vehicle, to turn, to realize they're going into an intersection or whatever the case might be. Even motorcycles, they can be very dangerous when people are operating those in an unsafe manner. There's plenty of videos and news articles that show what occurs when people think that they can go and use these devices that are meant as tools, right? Vehicles are meant as tools to get you from point A to point B, but people take those things and they use them improperly, and they bring a lot of suffering to themselves and others. It's constantly in the news. So after that, you want to look at number 2 there and ask yourself, do I feel pressured to make a choice that I am not comfortable with, right? For the most part, you're not going to be pressured, like I mentioned last class. You won't feel uncomfortable with making a choice that's beneficial for you, right? Something that's not going to bring you harm, but actually bring you benefit, okay? Something that's going to get you to make the right choice. Like, you know, I don't think a person would ever feel uncomfortable if their peers or their friends came to them and encouraged them to study for the upcoming midterm. Yeah, I don't think I really feel comfortable studying right now, you know, said no one ever. They might not want to study, right, because they want to do something else. They might want to go hang out at the mall or, you know, play video games or watch movies or binge on Netflix or whatever, but they're not really uncomfortable about it, okay? We tend to feel uncomfortable about things that we might not necessarily know the outcome of, okay? That's kind of where people, this notion of fear comes in. They fear things that they don't know the outcome of. They fear things that they don't fully understand, or something that they know could potentially be dangerous, okay, and or could get in trouble as a result of, even if it's not dangerous, right? So they become uncomfortable when someone tries to pressure them to do something because it's outside of the boundaries of the rules that have been set for them. Okay, and stop, think, and ask number 3 here. Will this choice cause me or my family embarrassment? And like I said before, in previous classes, making the right choice will never bring about shame or embarrassment. Okay, you might be the only person standing, right? You might be the only person who's trying to encourage people to not, steal or to not be disrespectful or to not, break the dress code or the speed limit or something like that. But embarrassment is never suffered as a result of that. Embarrassment comes again as a result of doing something that is wrong. I've got a definition here for the word embarrassment, and it talks about a state, not a geographical state, but more of an emotional or a mental state of a person. And it says embarrassment or awkwardness is an emotional state that is associated with mild to severe levels of discomfort and which is usually experienced when someone commits a socially unacceptable or frowned upon act that is witnessed by or revealed to others. Okay, so not necessarily someone witnessed or saw you do it, but someone knew you did it and they mentioned it to someone else. Okay, being embarrassed about something doesn't always mean that you've done something immoral, right? Walking down the road and feeling confident and slipping on a patch of ice, that can be embarrassing. I think most of us who have slipped and fall, one of the first things we do, we get up and we look around to see, at least I do, get up and look around to see if anybody saw that, right? Sometimes people will try to play it off and do push-ups, but, in regards to morality, it's interesting that they use the word here, unacceptable or frowned upon, socially unacceptable or frowned upon. Now in today's society, that's really changed. About 50 to 100 years ago, the things that are accepted in today's society fell into this category as something being socially unacceptable. And it's a part of some of the things we're going to cover tonight in regards to some of these situations that can help you to exercise self-control. One of those things being premarital sex. It was considered socially unacceptable for a person to, a young woman or a young man who would be engaged in these activities and they not be bound through an agreement, through marriage or something like that. Okay, that was looked upon as being very, very wrong. Okay. But like I say, as morality has declined over the years because these concepts have not been taught, they've been gotten away from, then the things that used to be unacceptable are now becoming mainstream or normal. That's why that word normal is used kind of so loosely in regards to describing social activities. So will this cause me or my family embarrassment? You want to think about that because what you do in the dark typically tends to come out in the light. Okay, it can't always be hidden for very long, especially in today's day and age with social media. Everybody wants to post everything on social media. Wow, I just burped and it smelled like garlic. And they want to post it on social media. You know, somebody just got a new vehicle, or they, you know, what was real big for a long period of time, people going to have a meal with their spouse or their family, they want to take a picture of the plate and send it out to social media. You know, I mean, who cares what you're eating right now, you know, but obviously they feel everybody else wants to know what they're eating, okay? So it's not hard to see what a lot of people are doing nowadays, because they're so eager to make everyone else aware of their activities. And sometimes these things do cause embarrassment to family. I remember hearing a report about people, they did a survey of people who know people who are what they call social media influencers. And if you remember that from previous teachers bringing that out, in other words, they have a lot of followers on social media. And they said it gets, sometimes it's embarrassing because all the time they're walking around with their camera, you know, always wanting to film things or do this. And they said it's also frustrating because there's nothing that we can do without them wanting to post it. You know, everyone stand and stand in these poses and everything. They can't just randomly just take a picture as friends, you know, at some type of, you know, national monument or something like that. No, they got to be standing this way and standing that way. And they said it's very difficult in interacting with somebody who's like that. And so, you know, there's, you know, kind of the downsides to all these, you know, letting the world know all your business, especially in how it affects your friends and family. And then the next one, number 4 there, is stop, think and ask yourself, can it affect my health and well-being or the health and well-being of someone else? And this is something that we had the opportunity to present several years ago to several schools, one being a high school, and addressing the growing fad of e-cigarettes, okay, because this is a fairly new, you know, thing that's hitting society, and a lot of young people are engaging in it. And the administrators, principals, counselors, and so forth at the school, you know, they wanted it to be addressed to kind of put in the minds of students, you know, the risks that they're taking with these things. And we showed some pretty graphic videos and some pretty graphic pictures showing some of the dangers that could arise as a result of the risk-taking behavior of not just smoking, but e-cigarettes. And we pointed some of those things out because a lot of these things young people don't think about. You know, they just see people doing it. You know, they see people pushing out these big puffs of smoke and making all these arrows and hearts and circles and doing all this stuff. And, oh, that looks cool. I just want to do it, right? And they're not taking into consideration that the chemicals that they're vaporizing and putting into their lungs, you know, are having a detrimental effect to their respiratory system and even to some cases their brains, okay? Not even taking into consideration the exploding vape pens that, you know, we showed some of those videos where it was exploding in people's pockets, and this was due to the lithium batteries and so forth. Exploding in people's pockets, sometimes in people's hands, sometimes in people's faces while they were taking a puff. So, can it affect my health and well-being or the health and well-being of someone else? And then number 5 there, if it wasn't for my friends, will I be faced with making this choice? And you can ask most young people, or just observe most young people, or think back when you were a lot younger and some of the choices that we made when we were younger. A lot of times we would not have done things if it were not for the fact that our friends were there encouraging us or giving us the courage to do something that we otherwise wouldn't have done by ourselves. You know, even I remember people, you know, encouraging you to go and talk to that girl, man. Go and talk to her. She's looking at you. You know, she's looking at you or something like that. You know, and they would push you to go do certain things. You know, oh, come on, you know, go ahead and take a drink, or hey, come on, let's skydive off this cliff. Come on, you know. We didn't have much cliffs in Ohio, but I mean, you know, whatever it might have been, swinging on a vine. I remember swinging on vines in Ohio. We had some, you know, big vining trees with vines that were like about that big, and they would hang down. And hey, you didn't know if that thing was attached firmly to the tree or secure, but it sure did look fun swinging on those things. But being by yourself, you know, I wouldn't have done those things. I wouldn't have done a lot of those things if it wasn't for the influence and the, me wanting to be accepted by my peers. And so a lot of times, and we mentioned this before about even driving, the rate of dangerous driving practices increases by something like 30 to 35% the more young people that you have in a car that is under the age of 25. Okay. And then look at number 6 here. If I stand strong and pursue the lessons I have learned from the Peaceful Solution Character Education Program, will I gain other friends more suitable than those who try to pressure me to do things that are wrong? Okay, and of course the answer would be yes. If you stand strong for positive morals, yes, you will eventually gain friends who would not try to pressure you into doing things that are wrong. People who are suitable for you, in that, remember what a friend is. They motivate, they encourage you to build and maintain a positive character. They respect your decisions. There's a mutual respect between two people when they're truly friends. They're not going to try to pressure or force you to do something that's wrong or something you're not comfortable with. Okay? So kind of keep those things highlighted there. And you can remind your students to go back to that and read that, and to kind of keep it in their mind, going over those things over and over, to take into consideration when they have to choose between negative influences or doing what is morally correct. All right, so let's look down to the next paragraph here below those points. And it says, when you stop, think, and ask yourself these questions before deciding on a course of action, and then proceed on a choice that is respectful of yourself and others, you are using self-control. Okay, you're taking consideration. You're having consideration and care for yourself. When you practice self-control, you're actually showing, like we said here, respect for yourself. You're showing respect for others by practicing self-control, because you're stopping and thinking about. Remember, the students are stopping and thinking about the potential consequences of the choices that they're going to make, right? And at times that might mean, like I said before, not making a decision right then and there. They might have to gather more information, get more facts, make sure those facts are correct before they make that decision. So even though it might be kind of against the grain, and like I said, living in our fast-paced society, everything is, now, they're going to start to develop the characteristic of being considerate, being conscientious of the choices that they make. And they'll go through that process, and eventually they might get faster and faster at it, but they'll go through that process of not being impulsive, which we're going to look at here. Because remember, the goal here is to avoid poor choices. Remember, we read that in the procedure, and encourage them to take these things in consideration so that they don't make poor choices. Well, look at the next sentence there. It says, keep in mind that self-control is the ability to carefully consider a situation before making a decision. To carefully consider a situation before they make that decision. Not to do something and go, I should have considered that, right? But to stop and think about it before they actually do it. Using self-control means not acting impulsively. In other words, don't make choices based only on emotions. And as we brought out time after time after time, again, a lot of young people mentally, they're still in a developmental stage where there's a lot of, as scientists call it, a lot of plasticity. A lot of their brains are still being molded and shaped by the influences that are bombarding them on a daily basis, right? And emotions play a huge part in that, especially when they get into these teenage years here, right? That's kind of right around the preteen and teenage years, right around 11 through 15, 16 years old and so forth. This dealing with 11 to 13, but all throughout that time period, the hormones, they affect the emotions, and that affects decision-making process. And that does not mean that they can't make decisions, of course. And what we're teaching them, they have to be taught how to kind of look through all the cloudiness of all these influences that are coming at them and bombarding them daily, and go back to the principles that they've learned in their decision-making process. Not always going to be an easy thing to do because the pull of excitement and fun and so forth is constantly pulling at young people, okay? Everything is made to look fun and exciting, right? But not everything shows the consequences of engaging in everything that looks fun and exciting, right? That's our job as teachers. Now remember this word impulsively, it means making a decision without considering the consequences. Okay, making a decision, not making a decision without thinking, because you're always thinking, but making a decision without considering the consequences or the outcome of your choice. Now, of course, I wrote a note here in my book here, this is the opposite of being impulsive. That is when you use self-control, right? Using self-control and not acting impulsively. In other words, don't make choices based on emotion. So when you show this respect for yourself, when you carefully consider, this is the opposite of being impulsive. Being an impulsive, irresponsible, dangerous person. Okay, think about all those negative characteristics that fall on you when you do make impulsive choices. Right? You become irresponsible. Right? You're not even having respect or showing respect for yourself, not alone someone else, right? You're being dangerous. People who make impulsive decisions in a lot of cases do very dangerous things, like we mentioned about the driving while intoxicated, drinking and driving and so forth, or just driving dangerously. You don't even have to be intoxicated, just driving recklessly on the roads. Even not necessarily on the roads, I was thinking about, some of these situations where people, they want to go and have fun on their four-wheelers, and it was mentioned before in some time ago in one of the previous classes, and, going and trespassing on people's land on their four-wheelers and end up getting hurt, right? Because they're in a place they're not supposed to be, and sometimes other people don't practice the peaceful solution, and they want to stop people from riding on their four-wheelers, so they set up little booby traps, right, to catch the four-wheelers, and sometimes that ends up in harm or even death to the riders. But a person becomes dangerous, impulsive, and irresponsible, not a person of integrity. You are, in effect, a rash person. And this word rash here, this is just a note that I put there for myself because a lot of these are synonymous or synonyms. You'll hear these things that they kind of have the same meanings, but they're different words. The word rash, I'm sure you've heard that. Don't make a rash decision. You'll regret it later. I heard a quote that says, the offspring of impulsive choices is regret. The offspring of impulsive choices is regret. Okay, you regret doing something that you should have stopped and thought about beforehand, but now you can't go back and change it, right? A lot of people, millions of people throughout the year, just in the United States alone, because of their choices, they end up pregnant and have babies, right? And they regret not necessarily the baby, but the choice that they made. They can't go back and undo that baby, right? Or in some cases, they can't go back and undo that abortion, okay? And they live with that regret, of the choice that they made for the rest of their life. Notice here this last sentence. Oh, I didn't give you the definition of rash. Sorry about that. Displaying or proceeding from a lack of careful consideration. Just the same thing we've just covered here when you don't practice self-control. Displaying or proceeding from a lack of careful consideration of the possible consequences of an action. Same thing as impulsive there. All right, so let's continue on here. This last sentence on page 136 says, as human beings, we have the great and awesome ability to think, reason, and consider. To think, reason things out. Kind of when you think about reasoning, think about weighing your choices out. You've got one choice on one hand, one choice on the other. Is this positive? Is it negative? How is it going to affect me? And these last 6 points that we just covered, you can go through that and many other things that we've covered in the previous classes. And then consider, this is why we are the most intelligent beings on earth. We should be the most intelligent beings on here. And really we are. It's just that we've gotten away from the moral principles that were so much upheld by many cultures for many generations, okay? So let's look over to page 137 because we're still covering these things. Remember, it was 136 through 137 and dealing with self-control here. So on 137, it says, here are some situations in which you can exercise your self-control to help you make moral choices. Remember, a moral choice is one that upholds the rules. Number 1 here. If someone offers you drugs, cigarettes, or glue, and gasoline to sniff, use your self-control and the knowledge you have gained from this program to guide you and say no. You don't have to go into a long explanation, just say no and mean it. And we had a big campaign in the United States, boy, I think that was in the 80s if I'm not mistaken. Might have been a little bit in the 90s too, but I remember when I believe I was in elementary school, and it was Nancy Reagan. Was it Nancy Reagan that brought that out, the Just Say No campaign? That was definitely in the 80s because she was in the president's wife back in the 90s. But it was a campaign to get people to just say no to drugs. Okay, and on the surface it was great, and they had a lot of commercials. The egg in the frying pan, showing the egg in the shell and then cracking it open and jumping in the frying pan and saying, this is your brain on drugs. Any questions? Okay, how is a young person, 11 to 13-year-old, who just woke up in the morning and looking at the commercial, how are they supposed to process that? For them, most of them, they're probably like, I want some eggs now, right? But you've got to give them everything else that goes with it, okay? Not only the short-term consequences, but the long-term consequences. Not only the consequences, but what they can do to strengthen their minds to avoid even getting in these situations to begin with. And that's the beauty of the peaceful solution. It shows you both sides of the coin while not glamorizing the negative things, but accentuating the positive. Work on eliminating the negative. We let you know that, yes, this is out there. These are negative things, but that's not the focus. The focus is on building your character. The focus is on, developing positive attributes. The focus is on respecting yourself, others, and the environment. Okay, because there's plenty of negativity in society. We don't need to add to it by focusing on it. But you see here it says, you don't have to give a long explanation. Just say no and mean it. Think about the damage it can do to you physically, mentally, and emotionally. Life is filled with challenges that you will only be able to handle if you can think clearly and are in the best of health. So don't do anything to yourself that is going to lessen your opportunity to reach your full potential. And you think about situations like this when people, they try drugs or, they sniff glue or something like that, and then something detrimental occurs, right? Somebody, they do these things. A lot of times they'll go and they'll hide in places. They'll go into abandoned buildings or houses or factories and so forth. Now, what occurs? Something occurs. The stairs collapse or floor collapse underneath them. Now they need to be able to think clearly to get out of that situation and get to safety. Or they're out in the middle of nowhere and it's cold, right? And they don't have jackets or the proper clothing. Well, they're not going to be able to think rationally and clearly to make wise choices to get themselves or a person who might be injured to a place of safety. A lot of times these just common sense things like call 911 totally goes over their head because they're so spastic and freaking out because they're intoxicated, right? And they're worried about everything else and they're not even thinking clearly. And this is where people who could have been saved, of course, being in a bad situation, but they could have been saved they lost their life because the people around them, their minds weren't clear because of some, mind-altering substance, drugs, alcohol, or whatever, mushrooms, whatever the case might be. And so don't do anything to yourself that is going to lessen your opportunity, to reach your full potential. I wanted to make mention here about something because, we talked about our, how young people and their decision-making process, a lot of times it's based on emotion. And I was looking because I had read this before, and there's a lot of pressures. We see pressures to engage in premarital sex, drinking, dangerous driving practices, and many other things that we've covered here in the Peaceful Solution. And there's science behind this too, and it backs up everything that the Peaceful Solution is saying in regards to the mind of a young person. And they classify people, these young people, as adolescents. And this was actually a study from Stanford University, and it was on how our decisions change with age, because I think most of us there's a lot of people in here who are over the age of 40, who can think back to some of the really risk-taking behaviors and silly decisions we made when we were younger, that if we were to talk to ourselves, with the knowledge we have now, we wouldn't have made those same choices, right? We would have said, yeah, I wouldn't do that if I were you. This is going to be the consequence of the choice you make, but we can't go back, of course, and do that. So, it's a combination of different things, experiences, things we've learned and we've seen that help to kind of shape and form the decision-making process we have now. One advantage we have is we have the Peaceful Solution to help us to learn how to make positive choices. Well, it says one thing we don't need science to prove is that nobody over 40 ever understood the decision-making process of a teenager. Well, that's according to teenagers. It says the reason comes down to more than just the lack of intelligence or inexperience on the part of the teenager. The juvenile brain is fundamentally different from older brains, and those differences show up in the kind of decisions teenagers make. And then they go on to show here how, certain neurons in the brain, as the young person is developing, start to die off, and certain new ones are being formed. Kind of the you don't use it, you lose it scenario. And it shows here that cells are being used more often, have a huge proliferation. In other words, if you're using them, they take precedence in the decision-making process. New brain connections come with new behaviors. And you can watch kids, basically, she said, try these things on. During this time of brain circuit upheaval, adolescents weigh the pros and cons of decisions differently from adults. They overestimate the rewards of a decision, i.e. fun and friends, but don't accurately estimate possible risk, grounding, police, even death. And as adolescents try out new behaviors, the results actually influence the circuits that are retained into adulthood, Fitzpatrick said. Behaviors that reap rewards strengthen new connections so that the behaviors are available in the future. For behaviors that aren't rewarded, the associated neurons wither, leaving that behavior as a mere embarrassing memory. And of course, it's we covered in the previous class about people who do drugs or even smoke cigarettes or drink alcohol, or it could just be activities. It's a dopamine or adrenaline rush. It's a reward center. These things, these hormones that are pumped out into your bloodstream, it gives you this rush, this great feeling. So people, they tend to chase after that great feeling, not always considering the consequences, but they're chasing after a feeling. And this is basically what they're saying, these reward centers, that when people feel great about something, they do something. It's like you're telling a child, wow, you did a great job. Every time they do that great job, they're going to come in and say something to you because they enjoy that reward that they get, even if it's just a verbal one, okay? And it's the same with teenagers. And then so they go on to say that, basically as people get older, adults get older, they're not necessarily looking for the fun and the gratification because they they're more confident in the choices that they make, due in part to the experiences and learning right from wrong. But young people don't have those things, right? And like we said before, experience is not always the best teacher. Sometimes people lose their life as a result of using experience to learn. Okay, so it's just interesting because scientific evidence shows this as well. You know, when there's a great pleasure that goes with the process of learning, those neurons, they're stronger in the brain. Okay, and neurons for your brain, knowledge and positive emotions are like the most tasty meals to it. You know, your neurons absolutely love knowledge, and this is why children, it's like they're constantly craving for more knowledge. You know, they're into things, they're asking questions, you know, especially toddlers, you know, in that age between 2 and 5 and so forth. You know, why is this? Why is that? This is this. You know, how does this? Where does this come from? You know, because their brains, their brain cells, I think it's right until about I think about 8 years old or something like that, where they reach this peak, right? And this is why people who know this, neuroscientists and so forth, you know, they'll take children if they want a particular trait in them, and they'll basically cram a practice of that particular skill or trait, whether it's you know, playing an instrument, whether it's being extremely proficient in math, whether it's reading or learning a language or multiple languages. It's through those formative years that the child picks these things up the most. Why? Because they have the greatest capacity, because they have so many available neurons to suck in all this information. It's like buckets, right? If you ever went out in the rain and you wanted to collect rainwater, well, if you got 1 bucket of a 1 5-gallon bucket, you're only going to get 5 gallons of rainwater. But if you've got thousands of 5-gallon buckets, you're going to get thousands and thousands of gallons of water. Well, it's the same way with young people and their brain cells. They've got so many of them that they're sucking in all this information. Now imagine that, and locking down those brain cells, in other words, constantly using them, you know, coupled with positive character traits, the lessons that we're learning from the peaceful solution, and being able to easily and quickly go back and draw off of that information because it's staying right in front of you, how much of a powerhouse that person will be, and the ability to make strong, positive, rational decisions that will benefit themselves and society. They would be, you know, an excellent leader in a community, you know, or to a family or to a company, okay, because they would never seek to do harm to anybody else. Okay, so let's look at number 2 here. It says, if someone tries to encourage you to engage in any premarital sexual behavior, use your self-control and say no. In fact, set your mind in advance to avoid certain situations where you're alone with someone of the opposite sex until you're ready for marriage and a family. And this doesn't mean, you know, well, you know, I think I'm ready for marriage and a family. Let me go ahead and be alone with you. Okay? Well, now, I guess I'm not really ready for marriage and a family with you. You know, better luck next time. No, this is a process. It's just as much as this process as we covered in chapter 4 on the getting to know, the friend stage. You know, developing friends and finding friends, how to choose friends, the observation stage, and so forth. But notice here, don't even be in a situation where you're alone with someone of the opposite sex. And a lot of harmful situations arise when this scenario right here takes place, especially at these so-called parties and gatherings and get-togethers and so forth, when young men and young women come together and they're having a great old time, right? And there's alcohol and music, remember, food, all these things are influences, right? And hormones and things like that raging, and hey, let's go outside and talk for a little bit, right? And next thing you know, someone's raped, okay? And it's not pointing a finger, but, you know, our goal is to help the students through prevention to learn, hey, don't even be alone in a situation. Take it one step further. Don't even go to a party where you could be alone in a situation, or take a ride with somebody where you could be taken to someplace else, you know, where something like this could occur and you be violated. Okay, we're trying to get them to kind of think preemptively and to have a little bit of forethought, because it's not a naturally occurring thing, especially if they haven't been trained in these ways of thinking from their youth or birth. Let's see here. You can also use self-control to avoid touching others, and this is very popular. It was brought out in by one of the teachers about how people, I think it was William, brought out about that people slapping each other on the rears a particular day of the year, going and just slapping people on the hind end, right? And they thought it was fun. They thought it was exciting, and the teachers didn't really even do anything about that. I mean, as a parent, I would be extremely frustrated to know that my child was being trespassed upon in that nature, and nothing was even being done to discourage that type of behavior from the students. Okay, because there are certain things that a child should never experience until they actually, engage in marriage with their husband and wife. And in today's society, it's just out there. It's just out there. It's on the television. It's even in the video games. As we were talking about before, I mean, there's points that a person can gain from actually raping someone in a video game. These are teachings that are going, and it's centered around fun. Think of a young man or a young woman who is playing this thing, and the gratification that they get from earning points for raping someone. What's going to be their mindset when they're in a situation where they feel that they can have the upper hand or more power over somebody else? In their mind, their subconscious mind, they're still playing that video game. They're trying to gain points. And a lot of times, a lot of people, groups of guys, yeah, they do keep a point system on who they're going out and molesting. Sadly, it takes place, right? Well, this is what's taking place in our society because of a lack of morality being taught within the family, within the schools, within our, entertainment and so forth. This is one of the things that, our goal is to try to reestablish or establish for the first time. So don't touch others. A lack of self-control has caused many people to be put in prison for sexual harassment. Don't even have to rape a person. Don't even have to violate them in that way. Just touching a person. Just getting close to a person and using your mouth, verbally assaulting someone. That can be considered sexual harassment. Oh, the things I would do to you if I had the opportunity. That's sexual harassment. Everybody doesn't want to hear that. No one wants to be treated in that manner. That is very disrespectful to another person to say those types of things to him. And it doesn't matter if it's a man saying it to a woman or a woman saying it to a man. It's still disrespectful. We have to have mutual respect for our peers. It is against the law and can get you into a lot of trouble. Let's face it, we live in a society where sex seems to be everywhere. Like it's mentioned, everybody's doing it. But of course, everybody is not doing it. On TV, in songs, and in the movies. Most of the time, they fail to mention the diseases that go with following this sexual pattern. That's what they really should base one of those reality TV shows on. I can't remember even what they're called, but the things that are done on these television shows in the name of ratings, they should come back 6 months later or a year later and show all the diseases that these people are having to live with, or the mental trauma or the mental toll that is taking on them, or the dishonor or the embarrassment or the shame that they're having to suffer in their body or even in their minds as a result of engaging in these other things. That would really paint a picture in a person's mind. Let them see the pus oozing out of the abscess of the individual, or there's even the where you can get certain of these STDs where people touch areas and then they, no one thinks about touching their face, right? And you can actually get, infections in your eye where your eye is just oozing juice and pus and things like that, Yeah, let's have that as a reality show to wake people up and to realize, no, it's not all just fun and games. There are consequences to these choices that are made. And sadly, our children don't see this. I remember when I was going to school and we had, it was in junior high, That's particularly the time I remember it. But they had sex education in school, and they brought in, some it wasn't brochures, but they were like on a board, like a display board, and they showed pictures of private parts and things like that, and showed how that was, what can occur in the body when these diseases come out in the person, but what they didn't show was that not always is that on display. Like was covered by the previous teachers, not every disease is shown on the outside of a person, but it's there and it's transmissible, right? And it could be years down the road. I remember us bringing out an article one time talking about it was two sisters. I believe they were twins, and they were about in their 80s. It might have been mid 80s or late 70s or something like that. And they had suffered from a particular STD. I don't remember exactly which one it was. Years down the road, it had lied dormant in their body. If I'm not mistaken, I think they were molested. They were raped or something of that nature. They didn't go out doing these things, seeking them. But it was still a consequence that came into their body years later in their 80s. And some of these diseases, they actually work their way through the body, through the spinal cord, through the nervous system, up to the brain, and they start causing a lot of mental diseases, where people can't make decisions and so forth. But these are the dangers that aren't being talked about. Now, in the 80s and 90s, we had AIDS, which was a big pandemic or epidemic. It says one president said this risky sexual pattern is only for the uneducated because of the risk of getting AIDS and all the other diseases. And it's a result of the uneducated, right? Because they're not knowing, I remember the author saying, most of the time children don't make decisions because they just want to be rebellious. They just don't consider the consequences of their choices. If they knew the consequences of the decisions that they made, most of them wouldn't make those decisions. And this is why education is important. At your age, there really are other things to talk about and other things to focus on besides sex. Have you ever heard the saying that it is better to be safe than sorry? Well, using self-control, the knowledge you have learned through education, and avoiding sex outside marriage will keep you safe rather than sorry. Why make choices you will regret for the rest of your life? And it's interesting because I actually looked up a couple of statistics, and it's interesting. And I won't go through them all, but basically they were keeping track from the time period of baby boomers up to what they call Gen Zers, which baby boomers they were in the early 60s, I believe. Early 60s to the Gen Zers, which came after 2000. The age of people losing their virginity just has been steadily declining, getting lower and lower and lower in the years. And one of the other things on the trends that they had in premarital sex, which was the numbers were pretty disturbing on that. Oh, there we go. And this was actually from the National, let me make sure I get that right, National Institutes of Health, and it shows trends of premarital sex in the United States. Now, this was from 1954 through 2003. And it shows data from the 2002 survey indicated that by the age 20, 77% of respondents had had sex. 75% had had premarital sex, 75% had had premarital sex, and 12% had married. By 44, that is age 44, 95% of respondents had had premarital sex by age 44. Even among those who abstained until at least age 21 or 20, 81% had had premarital sex by age 44. Among the cohorts of women turning 15 between 1964 and 1993, at least 91% of them had had premarital sex by the age of 30. And among those turning 15 between 1954 and 1963, 82% had had it by the age 30. All right, and 88 had done so by the age of 44. So we can see there that the number had increased over time from 82 to 91%. Why? Because of the influences. That's a part of it. Because of the influences and the things that have been made to look acceptable and fun and exciting in society. And so the young mind grasps hold of these things, and they go, yeah, I want to do that too. Oh, my friend was telling me about this and how great this was. I think I want to try it too, right? And they just, what they say, they throw caution to the wind. Here's caution. Let it blow off. I'm not using it anymore. I'm going to sow my wild oats. Okay? They're wild oats. Well, you need to tame those oats. We have to tell them, tame their thoughts, tame their thinking, tame their emotions, and not make impulsive choices, but stop, think, and ask themselves, will these decisions I make bring harm or embarrassment or shame to myself or others? How will the choice I make right now affect my future? And of course, that's what we're covering in this chapter here, in my choices in my future. Well, I think I'm going to stop right there on number 2 there and let the next teacher pick up on these next 2, because there's a lot more to learn from self-control and criminal activities and aggression and violence, because that is something that also affects a lot of young people. It's not just young people, but older people as well. And so our next teacher is going to be David, and he'll be starting on page 137 for the next class, which is going to be the 29th, 29th, and we'll be joining you here. Join us 5:30 Central Standard Time. Thank you for joining us, and have a wonderful evening.